efforts to do it. Okay. We continue. And the second one, I think in some ways, the previous sessions have actually, oh, okay, good. So we continue now. And ironically, the previous sessions, both the focus sessions and the first discussion session, have actually led to this session. This is sort of the culminating thing. It's the 3 Cs initiative, and the big question is current and future security integration possibilities. Those are things that have not been at the center of the priorities of the 3 Cs initiative, but given the current situation in Europe, and given the current situation of what not only Ukraine faces, but the possibility of conflict by the other countries near Ukraine, it is imperative, I think, and that this should be discussed. Is there a possibility that the 3 Cs initiative can have a security integration parameters or vector? And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to the chair, Glen Howard. Glen Howard actually doesn't really need much of an introduction. For 20 years, he actually ran a very powerful entity here in Washington called the Jamestown Foundation, did an enormous amount of work precisely around the area. In fact, the Black Sea was their specialty at the time. And now runs something called the Saratoga Foundation, which I think is extremely worthy and has done some really fabulous podcasts about not only what's going on in Ukraine, but basically the region that we're talking about. So, Glenn, with that, I'm giving it to you, and please continue. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Walter, for that generous introduction. It's great to be here. As many of you know, I very much, or may not know, I cover, very interested in the security issues in the region. And so I want to set the tone for this panel. We're here to talk about 3 Cs initiative, but as with any infrastructure project, there's always a dual mobility aspect of infrastructure that has a civilian versus a military role for it. So, for example, if you want to look at Constanza report, it's important also because it's also a very important Black Sea hub, and for reinforcement supplies. Gdansk is also very important. And so when we look at the map and the geography of Eastern Europe and of the Baltic, and where Poland, which is basically the backbone of the 3 Cs initiative, is very strategically important, because Poland is really the fuel and the impetus for this. And so if you look at it at any type of wheel, there's always the cog in the wheel. And Poland represents that key aspect of the connectivity, which makes 3SI so important. Connectivity is, it's the ancillary projects that are coming off of that. So when they talk about, for example, it was mentioned in the previous panel, the Via Carpathia Road. A lot of people don't really symbolize or signify, understand kind of what Via Carpathia is. But what these routes that are all part of 3 Cs initiative is all these different parts and aspects to it. And so understanding that is very, very important to the security dimension, because so much money has been put at the 3 Cs initiative, but the 3 Cs initiative, as it was mentioned in the previous panel, there's still a lot of things with the connectivity aspect that have not materialized. But this is all occurring in what? A war is going on. Europe's largest conflict since the end of the Second World War is going on in Ukraine. The war has now entered, is longer than Russia's role and Soviet Union's role in the Second World War. So Russia is now will begin next February, the 4th year of the war. It's going to be very critically important because it's now drug on, but yet we're still facing issues with mobility, infrastructure development, and that is really plaguing this area, despite the good news that came out of the 3 Cs Initiative Summit in May. was the fact that Turkey has now been added to the part of the Three Seas Initiative. So, Walter, you need to update your map and play and remember to have the Turkish role in it, because the connectivity route is going to be very important, because now we've enforcing the sanctions. New sanctions, Margarita's mentioned, have been Lukoil in Bulgaria and refinery are now going to be a part of that sanctions regime. And so that's going to open up new opportunities along in oil and gas and energy and infrastructure in the Three Seas Initiative. So helping us to tackle that, we're not going to get all of that today, but we got segments of it. And with our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 panelists who'll be speaking about that. And as Kateryna mentioned in previously, what was the statistic you used? 15 out of 114 projects of the 3SI have been, so 14 out of 143 projects have actually been implemented. So, wow, that's not really a good track record. So, I'm going to go ahead and begin with this, but I'm currently working on a project and a book on how it's called the Pontic Revolution, how the war in Ukraine is transforming NATO's eastern flank. And so transportation mobility is very, very important. It's part of that. I wrote a paper about the role of Ostrava in the Czech Republic as an alternative air base to Ramstein. And so when you look at the map of Czechia connection to Poland, you see mobility is all about railroad connections in Eastern Europe. And it's very, very strategically important, as are the rail air hubs that are currently in place in the region, and in place in countries like Czechia and Poland have invested tremendous amounts of money in improving that corridor and that level of connectivity between Poland as Poland tries to transform Three Seas Initiative from the traditional historical shadow of Russia with east-west transport networks to a north-south axis. And so north-south axis is all about if you understand anything about Polish-Lithuanian history, the Amber Road, the Viking Railroad, which once existed, the connectivity with the Varangian Guards going to Constantinople to participate in the Crusades coming from the Baltic. So they call that the Baltic-Pontic axis. And so as we look at how these infrastructure 3SI is developing, keep in mind that the historical trade routes, which once existed, are still in play. And the connectivity between the Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Baltic and the Black Sea continue to exist. Bulgaria, Varna, where were all those Varangians going? They were headed to Varna. So this is all in play. Very important things are transforming this flank. I was talking to General Kimmitt beforehand. I'm not going to dominate much further, but Walter said take my time. But listen, let's keep in mind that during the Second World War, Lend-Lease was all about corridors. It was the Persian corridor, 1,000 miles of transport of American trucks, Studebakers headed to Moscow. It was also through the Arctic convoys and transport. So as we talk about Northern Distribution Network, America's footprint in this region, Eurasia, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, we can get the job done. We can play a role in transforming this. It is, Three Seas Initiative is about the European Union, right? But America's shadow is over this region. And then we're playing the role with the munitions and everything else, and the air hub in Jaseonka, Rzeszów, which is the big rail air transport hub. They call it Rail Force One, which goes from Rzeszów to Kiev. That's what the presidents take when they want to get there overnight. And rail is playing a very important role in that. So I'm going to start off and turn to the first speaker, to Ambassador Zuckerman. Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. Ambassador Zuckerman, you mentioned the state of Romanian rail and transport network, and that the rail network in Romania is really, as you said, and even the roads, you said they're worse than currently they are worse than they were during the time of Ceausescu. I mean, were you really for real there?
I certainly was. The average speed on the Romanian railroads is something like 25 kilometers an hour, 30. It's some incredibly low number, which is less than the average speed in the days of in the communist days, and even going back further in the days of King Michael. It's just incredible. They have failed to maintain the railroads. They've failed to maintain the roads. They've been building some new roads, but it's been an abysmal failure, which really brings me to a point that we're kind of dancing around, but nobody's really articulated. I don't believe that when we're talking about the war in Ukraine, we're really talking about the war in Ukraine. I think this war is much bigger. I think it affects the rest of Europe. I think there's a variety of hybrid, kinetic, and other attacks on, if not all, most of European countries, and some outside of Europe as well, like in Africa, South America, Central America. So we have seen that. We have seen as a result Hungary, Slovakia, Austria. We've seen acts of sabotage from the Baltics to the UK. So, and cyber and hybrid attacks, social media attacks against political parties to destabilize European democracies are rampant. We see it in Serbia, Romania. We've seen it in Moldova, where the Moldovans acted very swiftly and efficiently to push back against Russian interference. So we're not talking about a war in Ukraine. We are talking about a war launched by Putin against Europe. The parallels, and Glenn, you and I have discussed this before, the parallels between the late 1930s with Hitler and Putin are unmistakable for all but the Mr. Magoo's amongst us. It is a frightening scenario that needs to be stopped. We need clarity of purpose, clarity of mission, and we need to act in unity. And sadly, a lot of that is lacking.
So, Ambassador Zuckerman, let me intervene. And so, when we talk about 3Cs initiative and current future security possibilities, and the term dual mobility comes to mind, what is it that is so important about Romania? And there's something within 3SI called, and I believe Kateryna mentioned this earlier, called rail to sea aspects of 3SI. So what comes to mind when we talk about dual mobility in Romania? And I'm not talking about Ben Hodges on the top of a tank riding in through Saber Ride coming into Romania. What is so important that you've seen as an ambassador sitting in Bucharest, and the fact that you just saw a certain component of Americans were withdrawn from Romania? But what comes to mind about 3SI and mobility and infrastructure today in what you've seen?
Well, the infrastructure issue is relatively straightforward, and I think it's a problem many of the European countries, especially a lot of the Eastern European countries. But
why is it from Romania? Why is Romania having so many problems with this?
Romania, and I love Romania, and Romania has an enormously great potential. But Romania, sadly, as I've said since the days I was ambassador here, has not finished the revolution. The former Communist Party lives in the form of the Social Democrats without the communist ideology. The Russians have infiltrated a variety of government institutions, as have the Chinese. They've prevented development. The roads are ill-maintained, buildings are ill-maintained. In many respects, they've become a beggar country, dependent on European funding for a variety of things. They've spent in excess of what they have. What we're seeing now is their inability to have highways and railways that are up to standard with European or Western European norms, US norms. But just to explain a little bit,
Is it bureaucratic? Is it bureaucratic inertia, Adrian, within Romania? Is that the problem?
I don't think it's bureaucratic inertia. I think it's Russian infiltration. Romania has one of the largest Black Sea gas deposits, and there's only one company currently extracting gas out of the Black Sea, and it took them 14 years to complete that project.
Are you saying that the Russians are exerting influence on Romanian officials to prolong this?
There are Russians either paid or as they call them in the Romanian media here, useful idiots that are have infiltrated the government and have stopped a variety of projects from being developed. Exxon was driven out, Chevron was driven out, all kinds of companies were taken over and shut down. I think the Russian goal is to keep Romania from becoming another Poland on the southern side of Russia, and they're doing everything they can to achieve that.
Okay. Okay. Well, that answers. I'm going to give you just a couple more minutes here, and then we're going to move on to our. What else would you say in the final analysis about comes to your mind that needs to be done when it comes to security in Romania and 3Cs initiative? What is there? Some adult supervision needed? Do we need a viceroy to be put in charge by the European Union? I mean, they've talked about the steering committee. Chair, I think Ray, you were mentioning that, right? Secretariat. Secretariat. Yeah. What's the answer to this?
I think what we're seeing in terms of Chinese influence here, which is over the last several years rebounded after during the first Trump administration, they were driven out on lots of respects. They've come back in with a vengeance. Russian influence has come back in with a vengeance. I think we need to see US leadership. I think European democracies do share values with the US, but I think they need leadership and support to be shown the right path moving forward, and that in fact they have an ally in the United States that will back them. And I think you need cohesion, and we have not seen cohesion amongst the European countries.
Okay.
And it's causing problems. The biggest problem, as everybody has said, with 3C's initiative is funding for these projects. And it's frankly not surprising because you're asking the European Union, the Commission, to fund another group to decide what they're going to fund. So in some respects, you're taking away decision-making authority from the EC in terms of which projects they will fund rather than 3Cs will fund. So I think that could be a cause that many countries are not funding.
So yes or no, the Secretariat will be an improvement, you think, or won't help?
I don't know. I think the issue here is funding. For example, somebody mentioned before, the cost for these 140 odd projects is over $100 billion. I don't know where that money's going to come from, and I don't see countries throwing money at this, not knowing how it's going to be allocated, when it's going to be allocated, and how their individual country is going to benefit for this. So okay. I see that as a big problem.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Adrian. We're going to move on to our next speaker. I know it's getting late in Vilnius, so Agnia, we're going to let you speak to get it out of the way and appreciate your comments. So based upon what you've heard, what is your perspective when it comes to, or the Lithuanian perspective when it comes to the issue of 3SI and security And you can even throw in and mention all those Belarus balloons that are coming across the border and blocking your air traffic. It's getting to be a nuisance. So Agnia?
Absolutely, and thank you. Thank you for having me. So from the viewpoint here in Vilnius, well, with the war in Ukraine and really with most recently with Belarus really having become a de facto Russian military district, and Lithuania facing in recent days various hybrids attacks from Belarus, mostly in relation to violation of the airspace, as you've noted, with the balloons that come carrying either contraband like cigarettes or propaganda leaflets. But this situation has evolved further now because Lithuania closed the border with Belarus. Belarus has taken Lithuanian transport drivers, lorry drivers, essentially captive, like as in a type of hostage diplomacy, you can call it. Lithuania has faced other also in the past types of hybrid attacks from Belarus, including for migration, instrumental migration or sending migrants across the Belarusian border into Lithuania and as well, of course, to Poland. So from this perspective, really, the Three Seas region, has really transformed into Europe's defense zone, forward defense. And I think there wouldn't be a lot of question. People would love to see the Three Seas initiative have more of a security dimension. It wouldn't really be a question of whether, but how far or how far it should go, how fast it should go. And I'd like to also echo what was said in the first panel. Really here in Lithuania, and I'm sure in the other Baltic states, there would be no question that the Three Seas initiative should include Ukraine, as well as security initiatives in the region should include Ukraine. So some of the Three Seas initiatives have already supported, you can say, defense in several ways, because the buildup of infrastructure can have that dual use value. Particularly, Rail Baltica will be very important for improving military mobility, the highways, the bridges, even the energy interconnections will enhance security during moments of crisis. From the perspective of the Baltic states, military mobility and rapid reinforcement are strategic priorities because the concern is how quickly support would come from NATO countries if there was
Is there anything going into Klaipėda? What about Klaipėda's role as what they call transport node? Is there any Three Seas initiative funding going into Klaipėda that could be dual use in consideration?
Well, the LNG import terminal, but that was completed not under Three Seas funding, as far as I know. So right now it's more in the Baltic states. It has been the data center in Estonia and the gas pipeline interconnectors. So Klaipėda, though, I mean, that region, you can say closer to Kaliningrad, though, you have to consider that there's still rail transit from Russia via, Belarus and via Lithuania into the Kaliningrad region. And that is also a great concern.
And that's now with Rail Baltica, which you mentioned. Rail Baltica is somewhat working inside of Lithuania up to Kaunas. But from Kaunas up to Riga, it's not working. And there's these delays with Rail Baltica now up to 2030 and cost overruns from $5.7 billion. Now they're going to say it's going to cost $25 billion just to complete that segment up to Riga. What is going on with Rail Baltica? Can you, other than, let's point the finger at the Latvians, so I feel comfortable doing that. But if, I mean, that's very important. Rail Baltica is mobility, and Three Seas initiative is you got to put men on rail. And let's put it, during the Second World War, in 48 hours, you could go from Berlin to Tallinn by rail. And now you can't. So what's going on?
Well, great point. I mean, things are having moved past, nearly 100 years ago. So, um, this has been a problem. Rail Baltica, look, it has been a project that has been discussed for decades. It's been in the works for decades, but the three here, the priority. For the three states and Poland was, well, probably you can say was not perceived as urgent in really up until this period, and the rails have always been designed well going up to Kaunas. So that I mean, even just the way geography moves, I mean, it's just more natural through Kaunas upwards towards Riga, but that leaves Vilnius out. Geographically slightly in an inconvenient location. So I mean, that work, I mean, I don't want to point the finger, but
Oh, that's okay. I
despite
can do
great,
it. I don't mind.
despite
I have Latvian friends and I chide them about it all the time. Yeah, but it's very important. Is there anything else about you want to point out about Three Seas Initiative in Lithuania that we need to keep in mind other than Kaliningrad is nearby?
yeah. Well,
A
and
stone's throw away.
and the transit that continues, right? The rail transit through Lithuania, to Kaliningrad, which is a concern, right? So it's not the transit we want. We want that different rail transit connecting with Rail Baltica. I mean, there's really hopes that the transport projects within the region can be connected with the EU 10T and that they can really get greater interconnection with Europe's larger transport systems. And coming back again to the digital integration, Air Force and air and missile defense coordination. This could be something that could be a project for the Three Seas, especially right now with the difficulties with the Lithuanian airspace. And frankly, there were weeks when flights were canceled or delayed. So I think there will be discussions in the future how to ensure the Vilnius airport or move more traffic to other potentially airports.
Would you say that it kind of paralyzed you? I've wondered that here sitting in Washington, what the impact was on Lithuania. I mean, did those balloons kind of paralyze your? It appears so to me.
Yes. Flights. I mean, the majority of flights were canceled for several weeks, or there was great uncertainties whether flights would be canceled or not, which stopped both people traffic and then, of course, movement of goods.
Okay. Well, listen. Well, thank you very much for your. Do you have any final comments before we move to our next panelist? I know it's getting late there. I just wanted to give you a chance to.
It is getting late here, but no. Again, I appreciate being part of this panel, and I think the Three Seas Initiative. When we think about security here in this region, connectivity will be security, and mobility will be security in case of conflict. So we'd, again, like to see more progress here on Rail Baltica and other particularly mobility and connectivity projects, because here it's kind of the eastern flank, geographically isolated and still isolated in a certain way in infrastructure as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Agnia.
Thank you.
And good night. So Margarita, you're pulling up the Varna column here in the Black Sea. So you're second here, and do you want to keep going in that order, or do you want to shift to Poland, or do you want to bounce around geographically?
Yeah.
Okay, Margarita. A lot has been going on in Bulgaria. So what do you want to say when it comes to security, Bulgaria's role in Black Sea? Three Seas Initiative, current future integration, security integration possibilities. And I'll tell you what I want to say when it comes to Bulgaria.
Say it.
There's a lot of finger pointing at problems internally in Bulgaria. You're right to say that. But there are some areas where Bulgaria has come through, and that's with its munitions. And the munitions to Ukraine and Soviet-era munitions, Bulgaria has done its part. And of course, anytime money's on the table in Bulgaria, right? I mean, you know, people come through. So I want to just say that is a very important role with its munitions capabilities in the war in Ukraine. It's played a very important role. Now you talk about this opportunity with Lukoil, and there's a refinery really sitting there now. And 3SI is also about energy and infrastructure. So what do you want to say about when it comes to security in 3SI?
Just to mention about the Lukoil refinery, it was also an important role, especially in the first year of the war, Russia's war against Ukraine, when the refinery, the Russian-owned refinery, working with Russian oil at the time, was sending fuel for the Ukrainian planes. And that was not advertised at the time. It became clear later, and it was a big uproar, of course, in Russia. But the management of Lukoil said, well, you know, we sell to our distributors, and where they send it is their business. So pretty much that was a critical role of the refinery. Later on, the refinery stopped working with Russian oil. It does not accept Russian oil at the moment. It switched completely because Bulgaria was part
Switch to
external.
Do you know where from?
Some is coming from Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, through the Black Sea. Some is coming from the Middle East.
And wait a minute, the president of Lukoil is Alekperov, an Azerbaijani.
Right, but that I don't think that's relevant. He's still serving a Russian company.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but
I'm saying
mostly the Middle East. But the position of Bulgaria is actually very good in that respect. The tankers are coming through the Bosphorus. Tankers are coming from Georgia, from Azerbaijan via Georgia. So being on the Black Sea is actually an advantage, and that's why it was easy to switch to a different oil. Kazakh oil is arriving at Novorossiysk, for example. I don't think Kazakh oil is coming this way to Bulgaria, not much of it, but in any event, the refinery stopped, Bulgaria stopped buying Russian oil much earlier than the exemption was allowed them to do so. And the exemption was for Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and Bulgaria. The three were by pipeline, and Bulgaria was via sea. But the exemption was in place when the Bulgarian government decided to stop earlier, much earlier. Last year, December, they stopped accepting Russian oil. Nevertheless, the ownership of the refinery is Russian. It's Lukoil refinery, and it is Russian because at the time of privatization of Neftochim, there were no Western candidates to buy the refinery. It was in '98. There were absolutely no Western candidates to do it, and Lukoil was the only candidate, and then they got it. So big strategic mistake on the part of the West at the time. Yes, Bulgaria was very unstable. There was economic crisis, bank crisis, collapsing, 16 banks altogether. It was a time of turmoil, but nevertheless, that was a strategic investment that was completely misplaced. And it's a very profitable refinery. It supplies the entire Balkan region. It sells gasoline to Romania and to other countries. In any event, this is about the refinery. Talking about connectivity, rail in Bulgaria is not much faster than in Romania. The average speed is 26 miles. So that's the average. Between bigger cities is a little bit higher, of course, 70, 80 kilometers, but it is less, it's lower than it was under Todor Zhivkov in '88. So there is a general decline of rail in countries in transition, in economic transition, and it's due to maintenance, lack of money. Bulgaria and Romania are not the richest European countries, so the rail took a really big hit. And this is why the 3Cs initiative is a catalyst for this development. It's good to be there, even if it doesn't pay for it. There is a policy of interconnectivity that is stimulating the governments to invest more and do their best to develop rail transportation. The rail that the Bulgarian government is actually working on connecting the north-south corridor connects Alexandroupolis in Greece and potentially Kavala to rail going north to Central Europe. And that's a very important connection that is happening. The other important connection that is not north-south, south-north is from the Black Sea to the Adriatic Sea. And that's also important connection in terms of the Three Seas Initiative, because it connects two seas. This is corridor, the West-East Corridor 8, which is a project supported by NATO. It's a NATO investment program and the European Mobility Program that is investing in this project because it allows the two seas to be connected. And of course, in the meantime, of course, the connection goes north to Central Europe. So there are other investments in airfields, one near port of Burgas, and in storage facilities and so on. It's not enough and it's not fast enough. The events that we're witnessing in the last more than 3 years, 3.5, almost 4 years since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine are telling us that these developments need to take place immediately, as fast as possible, because they're also protection, they're also way of, as you mentioned, ammunition to continue going to Ukraine. And the ammunition production is going for 24/7 in Bulgaria. It hasn't stopped. It's not just the Soviet munition, it's new munition that is being produced and being sent all the time. And the capacity, the way, I mean, the factories in Bulgaria, because they were established in Soviet time, they produce the invaluable munition that is actually fitting Ukrainian weapons. The new one is also in these parameters. I mean, in the first 3 years of the war, about 7,000 tons of munition were produced and sent to Ukraine. This is huge. So what is Russia doing at the moment? The informational warfare, because there have been explosions at these facilities.
There is an aspect of sabotage.
Of course.
So, because that's one of the things that came up in this discussion about Three Seas Initiative and infrastructure development is that you still have this hanging element of sabotage, which occurs, every day in Poland, something's being messed with. So that's a very important aspect. What you're saying here is
yes, there have been explosions at these munition production facilities, particularly the ones that sent munition to Ukraine. There have been several of them. The prosecutor general has been very slow to bring up charges. The judicial reform is not completed in Bulgaria. Governments have been changing every several months. I mean, in the last 3 years, Bulgaria had about 7 elections, parliamentary elections. So that internal instability is not conducive to persecuting the sabotagers, the people who are conducting the sabotage. But guess what Russia is propagating now in Russian media and spreading that narrative to Bulgaria. But these are Bulgarian partisans that are sabotaging the munition production that goes to Ukraine. So in two words, the changes in terms of military modernization took years to come to fruition. They are going much faster now. But until recently, Bulgaria was flying Russian MiG planes and depending on maintenance by Russia.
By Russia, yeah.
Yes. So now they have F-16s, 8 of them, and 8 more coming. It may seem very, very little, but for a small country like Bulgaria, this is huge, and it's a big expense as well. They're also updating the naval stock. I mean, there are 2 corvettes that are being built. They're selecting, those that are with U.S. engines as well. But again, this goes well under democratic governments, pro-Western governments, and it gets stalled when they are pro-socialist or pro-Kremlin, especially with the president who is openly pro-Kremlin. So this, depending on the government, the nature of the government, the reforms can go faster or they can go slower. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's a populist government. It's a coalition between the party of Boyko Borisov and one part of the Turkish party and one even more populist party. So what happens within this majority in parliament is not necessarily what we want here. to happen, but they depend on decisions that are made in Washington and Brussels. And this is a tool to push for those reforms. Through Washington, through Brussels, they will have to comply because they are very dependent on support by the West.
So connectivity and continuity are really, really important. Okay, well, thank you. So Ray, we're gonna turn the floor over to you. I'm sure you have a lot to say. Now, many of you don't know, Ray was a former U.S. military attaché in Warsaw. So when it comes to the military dimension, he certainly has the eye and understanding for where infrastructure fits security. So based upon what you've heard, what is it you want to say about Three Seas Initiative and Polish security, and since they are the ones that really spearheaded the Three Seas Initiative?
Yeah, that's true. The Poles really did spearhead Three Seas. And you just mentioned continuity. One thing that's very important in Warsaw, it would not be clear right now if they had not elected sort of a successor conservative to President Duda, if the emphasis on the Three Seas would still be there. Because certainly on the prime minister's side, the government side, they're not fully on board. The presidential office, that's the continuity that has gone on for 10 years since President Duda started it. Now President Nawrocki sort of carries the torch, but there's still, some warming up going on with the prime minister's side of this. Ultimately, I think the Poles will get more, cohesive between themselves. I'm talking about the president's office and the prime minister's side of things on this project. Because you got to remember, on defense, the prime minister's got the minister of defense, he's got the infrastructure minister, and all those guys are under him. So government funding is coming out of the prime minister's side of things, where the president has got the bully pulpit promoting the Three Seas and working the transatlantic link, especially President Nawrocki, when he visited President Trump early on within his first month, that was one of the three main topics, was the Three Seas Initiative and continued U.S. backing of the Three Seas Initiative. On 10T, that came up. I think, Margarita, you mentioned 10T, this Trans-Europe transport network funding that comes from the EU. If a project is put under that framework, the EU, a Three Seas project, the EU will look at it as a valuable project to fund. And so one of the major successes, I would say, and the Poles had a lot to do with this, is pushing Via Carpathia as a 10T project. And then the EU accepted it that way, and that allowed EU funding to support Via Carpathia, which is still incomplete because in Slovakia, there's about a 100-kilometer portion of Via Carpathia. It goes from basically Estonia to the Black Sea. That's not finished. But on Via Carpathia, when it comes to security, you talked about the rail networks and road networks, the importance of Via Carpathia, because it is this sort of north-south connector. This hits the whole eastern flank of NATO, allowing both support to reinforcement, but also for reconstruction of Ukraine. All the goods that might be coming into the Western ports, whether they're in Poland, Lithuania, or further west, are going to need to get to Ukraine somehow. And that road network and then the rail network to get to those roads will be important. And one thing I've just highlight here, we were talking about the Baltic rail issue. It's unbelievable. It's been going on this long. One thing that's interesting in Poland, there is still a Soviet era gauge line coming out of Ukraine that goes all the way to the heart of Poland. It goes to Katowice in the center of Poland, this Soviet era rail, and it's still used. Yeah, it's a gauge. It's a gauge. It still goes all the way to, and it's still used for the Ukrainians to receive, and Poles to receive transport goods back and forth. Then
why haven't they made that jump?
Because there's been other focus. I mean, the whole rail in Poland is Western. This is just one link. It allows Ukraine to still use their transport system to get all the way to the center.
It's intentional then.
It's intentionally left that way, but it's also probably long-term project to upgrade if Ukraine is given the ability to upgrade. Okay, so then on other aspects of sort of the security and defense of the three Cs, we haven't talked a lot about the digital side of this because that is one of the key pillars of the three Cs. You know, infrastructure, transport, mobility, the energy, and then the digital. So on the cybersecurity, all this sabotage operations, below Article 5 cyber operations against us, the cyber component or the digital component of the three Cs offers us a very major ability to reform that whole sector as we're rebuilding. And then it's important, I think, to add here on cyber, the issue of China. What I've been saying for some time in Warsaw is, look, you know, when we talk about keeping U.S. presence, military presence in Poland or in the Baltic region, Romania, it's not just about Russia, because if we lose Ukraine to Russia, we're going to lose Taiwan to China. And then China is all over Europe doing infrastructure projects themselves. They bought the most important, one of the most important ports in the Mediterranean, in Athens. They have bought interest in major ports in Germany, the same ports we would use to reinforce the NATO alliance. The United States will use the same ports that China is a primary investor in Hamburg, Rotterdam, and other ports in the West. So the Chinese are everywhere. And if we think we're just going to stop the Chinese or block or blunt the Chinese in the Pacific, we're missing the boat. We're doing more in the sort of Western Hemisphere that's focused on China, but we cannot forget our best allies on the planet are here in Europe. Our biggest trading partner is the EU. And if we don't realize that China will replace us and wants to replace us wherever we're not, we're missing the boat. So that's a security issue as much as being present and active on both the security side. And then when we talk, going back to digital, we talk about the Chinese 5G. You know, the Trump administration, the first one, spent a lot of time and effort to get allies not to buy into Huawei and 5G systems. And then that was kind of just went into neutral during the Biden administration. I have not seen a renewed effort, but many allies like Poland signed up to pushing back on Chinese 5G and others. I think Lithuania and the Baltic states too. But that's a problem. We don't realize that the three Cs helps us on pushing back with China globally.
And what would you like to see more of in Poland when it comes to 3SI and focus?
Yeah. So on the secretariat side, I think organizationally, there's some good proposals out there now. So the investment bank that set up the 3Cs investment fund in Poland is based in Warsaw. The lady that ran that, Beata Muzyczna, she was the president of that bank, is once the government changed, they've replaced her, but she's out in the private sector now, and she's doing a number of things to help the three Cs. And one of them is this business council, which could serve the function of the secretariat. And at the same time, as the business council organizes companies for private investment, she's engaging internationally. So Japan, we haven't talked about today, is a strategic partner of the three Cs, as well as Germany, Turkey, you mentioned Spain, and the United States. But Japan is very keen on getting involved in Eastern Europe and through the three Cs. And because of a visit that Beata and her team just did to Japan, they're bringing a delegation of a bunch of Japanese companies in December to Warsaw and to the Baltic states to look at where Japan investment can help both the three Cs and, of course, return on investment for Japanese companies. So this is a good initiative. I think there's a lot of new elements here, and I'll just maybe wrap up this way, Glenn. It took 30 years looking at NATO with this, super best alliance on the planet. It took us 30 years to figure out that Russia is going to come back as our enemy. And we're complaining about this 10-year window on the 3Cs initiative, which has not gotten full support of the EU, gotten some good support from the United States. And so for anybody to complain that the after 10 years, they haven't done anything. And I've heard this in Warsaw. I talked to some think tank guys there. Oh, my God, they haven't done one thing. And it's all focused on the central fund of the 3Cs, which has been very small. Poland was was a prime investor, 750 million, 20 million from a bunch of countries like Bulgaria. It added up to $1 billion total. It's all spent on decent projects, but it's not the 100 billion that's supposedly out there in needed projects. So this new organizations that are standing up, private equity funds, organization of the Business Council, and some of these other initiatives to get foreign investment, I think are positive signs. We need to see more of that, and we need to see the United States more back, this administration, back into supporting the 3 Cs.
Yeah, I think this administration initially in 2019 gave $1 billion towards 3 Cs initiative, so they put their money where their mouth was on that.
They committed that, but they did not give that. They reduced it to 300 million,
all right.
and some of that has gone to the 3 Cs, but the 1 billion was reduced quite significantly.
Well, that's thank you very much, Ray. The 3SI Business Council is really interesting. I think maybe they need to have create business councils in all the countries to help get this thing kind of kickstarted and going further. Kateryna, you're last on this list, and then we're going to turn the floor over to General Kimmitt, who's absorbing everything here. I see him taking notes. So, Kateryna, what do you want to say about Ukraine's role in the 3 Cs initiative and security? You've heard a lot today. You've heard mention of Odessa. We've mentioned Lviv, or I'm going to mention Lviv, and the connection between Rezheshov and Kiev and through the railroad. What is it you want to say? It's important.
Good question. Many things to say, but few minutes left. So I will focus on the big picture and then build up from there. I think that it's important, and I would like to highlight that the timing for the creation of the 3 Cs initiative was exactly after Crimea annexation and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In parallel, in 2016, to the launch of NATO forward presence in Eastern flank, in Baltic states and in Poland. And I don't see this as a coincidence. I see this as exactly continuation of the same strategic thinking about addressing both Russia and China increasing threat in the region, and how it aligns with US national interests, with not only European security, but transatlantic security. Therefore, I think it's important to keep this in mind, that there is a significant aligning of interests and potential collaboration, not only for this region within the EU framework, but also more broadly, like in trans-European framework, including NATO. That's something that I just wanted to put on the table as we talk more about Ukraine further. And therefore, because Ukraine obviously sees NATO as the primary security guarantor, and this conversation is off the table for the moment, it's European security which is so essential, and basically EU membership for Ukraine is so essential to integrate it into the broader security umbrella. So this being said, I think that thinking of 3 Cs initiative, both from the perspective of connectivity, but also resilience and capitalizing on Ukraine's experience, war experience of resilience, of rebuilding and reconstruction of energy, for example, reconstruction of transport corridors, reconstruction on site immediately after the shellings. Basically, this could be a very important experience that basically European neighbors could capitalize on, and also reinforce Ukraine's reconstruction along the lines of interoperability, not only from the perspective of EU, but interoperability from the perspective of NATO. I will also highlight the deterrence component, which is so essential for the region. Basically, Russia deterrence, both from the perspective of Ukraine already doing it, and from the perspective of potential expansion of Russia's kinetic aggression, because in all other ways its aggression is already expanded, but the military kinetic aggression could be. And so basically, I like this point about 3 Cs initiative potentially having a potential to becoming a pillar for European reconstruction and security architecture. That could be a pillar. But again, my sense, based on everything that we've discussed today, is that we probably should not be focusing too much on 3Cs initiative from the institutional perspective. Again, I agree that creating secretariat would be important and institutionalizing this whole thing. But also, if we think beyond that, we could put the collaboration between the participating countries in a broader transatlantic context. Specifically, that we have now Turkey joined as a strategic partner, and obviously US as a critical ally for this whole initiative. And now Japan joining. So I don't want to go into too much details, but I would say that going back to the first panel conclusions, it is so important to put security first, and from this perspective also include Ukraine as a full-fledged member into this initiative.
When they brought up the term Via Carpathia, what came to your mind? Ray mentioned that there's 100 kilometers of territory. I understand from my Slovak contacts that Slovak munitions factories are still providing ammunition to Ukraine, despite the change in government. So when it comes to the Carpathian Mountains and the role of this Via Carpathia, what, as a country with the Carpathian, what can we, how developed is that network through the Carpathians?
So
From a Ukrainian perspective.
Sure. So this project is currently still ongoing, to my understanding. It's a kind of highway extension into Ukraine. The most important part.
Not rail? No rail capabilities?
There is a rail to sea corridor. That's a
Through the Carpathians are no rail connections?
Not through the Carpathians. So
Okay.
there is a highway when we talk about Via Carpathia. That's my understanding of it. And the point here is that it's all dual use capabilities. That's the most important thing here, that it actually can be used for both civilian and military purposes. And again, there is an ongoing project, but I do not see it being completed. And especially that initially, Ukraine was not viewed as a participant member of this project, but there is like a side extension that is being built into Ukraine. So that's something that we need to be cognizant of as we are considering Ukraine joining or not joining as a member to the initiative. So initially, it was basically all focused on EU member states.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that overview. I mean, I think there's all these dimensions. One of the things I was curious about what would be Ukraine's role in the 3Cs initiative now that it's playing a larger role in with the 3Cs initiative at the summit, right? I mean, what was the conclusion of the 3C summit? Was to invite Ukraine? It can't be an official member, but it can be an unofficial member.
It's already associate.
Associate, right.
It's already associate
Okay.
member.
All right.
And so obviously, as we've discussed, there is an advocacy ongoing about including Ukraine. But apparently, it's all boils down to the fact that it's not an EU member, which doesn't make sense from the strategic perspective, because the 3Cs initiative is not exclusively, should not be viewed exclusively as an EU project, specifically given their alignment with NATO forward presence in Eastern flank, and how this clearly, there's clearly room for coordination.
Okay. Well, the gentleman in the front says 0 time here for me on this. So you get the final word, General Kimmitt. Based upon all the things you've heard today, what do you make of all this?
Well, first thing I want to see if I can make the microphone work. Would you put up that slide of that photo that I gave you guys back there in the back? All right, while he's doing that, obviously you all have been focused on this for a long, long period of time. And as somebody who has not, I've been very fascinated by listening to what everybody's had to say. Because I hear this duality. What's really going on is this 3Cs is an opportunity, and it's also a necessity. It's an opportunity from the fact that this is giving this region probably the greatest opportunity for economic growth and reconstruction and construction, not dissimilar to what the United States did in Western Europe at the end of World War II. But it's also a necessity because, look, I think we have got to acknowledge, and we finally have acknowledged, that President Putin is going to be around for a while, and he's going to continue to push. And the fact remains is we got to understand the eternal gratitude we owe to Ukraine, because for the last 3 years, by fighting, they have awakened us from this holiday from history that we've taken since 9/11. I've spent 50 years since I graduated from West Point. In the first 25 years of that, I was doing Cold War, Western Europe kind of things. I was in NATO headquarters on 9/11. A year later, I found myself in Iraq, and for the past 25 years, we seem to have been focused on the Middle East and a different kind of warfare, talking about counterinsurgency, talking about human terrain analysis, so on and so forth. But 3.5 years ago, Vladimir Putin reminded us that the holiday from history was over. And this really gets back to what we were taught in the 80s. In our war college, in our staff college at Leavenworth, it's a 1-year program. And the staff colleges, they bring in the young majors, teach them, send them back out to the line to learn how to fight battles. What they do is there's a 2nd-year program for about 50 of those students, and they go to a 2nd-year program called the School of Advanced Military Sciences. And you don't learn to be a battle planner there. You learn to be a war planner. You learn how to do operations. You learn how to do campaigns. And while people think we spend all of the time at that school reading Clausewitz, the first person we read was Mackinder, to recognize the geographical nature of terrain and about war. You learn as much about Mackinder and his theories as you do about Clausewitz and his theories, and Henry Ford and his theories. Because if you want to fight in Mackinder's heartland, this is not just a couple of battles up and down streets of Baghdad or Skin-Boldak. It is everything that you have been talking about today. You've been talking about railroads. You've been talking about airheads. You've been talking about production. 7,000 tons. That's a lot of ammunition, isn't it? You know what that is? It's not. 7,000 tons is 5 days of artillery rounds being fired in Ukraine by the Russians. 7,000 tons is roughly 50,000 rounds. The Russians are firing 10,000 a day at peak. 7,000 tons, 5 days. You've got to understand the sheer bulk and scale and size and weight and to fight this industrial level warfare, which we thought after 9/11 we would never do again. Ukraine, unfortunately, and fortunately for the bravery of the people of Ukraine, they've given us the time to relearn what we knew 25 years ago. It's not about tactics. It's not about operations, it's about campaign. And that's all about weight, scale, size, speed. Yes, some things are different. We probably won't need as much artillery in the future as we're using in the past. Back then, 10,000 rounds is what my battalion was expected to fire in the old days. But now, because we have precision weapons, you can reduce that bulk. But you need roads, you need railroads, you need airheads, you need production facilities, you need bases. And it's important to understand that the military is this not telling the military anything they didn't already know. Look at from the Council of Foreign Relations. If you look at the red triangles on the left, that's what I grew up with. That's the bases, the traditional West European NATO Cold War era bases. I can point the base that I was at in 1961 as a child when the wall came up. I can show you the base in 1989 and 1990 where I was when the wall came down. I can show you the base that I deployed from into the Balkans. I can show you the base that I was at when 9/11 hit. That's all in red. Everything in gold to the right is a recognition that NATO and the United States is no longer there to defend Western Europe. It's there to defend Europe, or what some people might call Eurasia. And the military is already taking the efforts to build those bases, to build that infrastructure that we're talking about, represented by the gold diamonds over there. You can see that we're moving east. That, of course, is one of the reasons why Vladimir Putin rationalized his attack, rationalized why he was attacking, because look at all of those bases going all the way up to Russia, and he used that as a pretext to attack. But that's what we need to do, not just for the military bases, not just to build, what's the name of the one in Poland now?
No, just, yeah,
You're right.
Yashenka. You talking about the hub?
Yeah.
Transport, yeah.
It's called what?
No, Rzeszów is the city, but the air base is called Yashenka.
Let's stick with Fort Trump.
Okay.
All right, that's easier. But you can see that what is being built there is fundamentally the base plate, as we used to say in the artillery, the pad, the infrastructure, so that we can not be surprised by Russia in the future. And it's throughout history, it's an old reality. War and trade are intermixed. War and progress are intermixed. Some of the greatest civilizing elements in history were the Romans and the Roman legions moving up into Gaul as they built their aqueducts, they built their roads, they built their forts. And it's unfortunate, and that's the duality of war, and that's the duality of conflict. But every one of those little diamonds, especially in gold, especially those that are American and American funded, are like little oil spots. You know, they put little oil spots down there, and it's kind of like a metro station. Everything grows around those oil spots, whether they're concerns, whether they're local towns that are supported, whether that brings in money from the United States to help build the roads. I can't tell you how many American-built railheads there are in Germany right now that we used to use to load our howitzers on there to take out to Grafenwehr. And those are the same railheads that have been used as we now pour equipment and material into Ramstein to get it out towards Ukraine, because that's a secondary entrepot to getting equipment there. But now Poland is doing most of that. So what have I learned from today? What I've learned is that this kind of sounds a lot like what I learned major and below, how to fight campaigns, what it takes. And it's no longer just about figuring out counterinsurgency. This is old-fashioned industrial level warfare. And if anybody thinks that we're not fighting industrial era warfare in Ukraine, they need to look twice. And candidly, that's how the Russians think. That's how the Russians have always thought about how to fight war. That's how they will continue to do so. And that's why this imperium that you've been talking about, this initiative that you've been talking about, unfortunately is ideally suited for not only the defense of Central Europe, but also for the progress in Central Europe as well. That's what I've learned today, and thank you for that.
Thank you. I would clap, but I'm trying to hold the mic. I think that's really great insight. And I think one of the things that was really reassuring to me was that the SAM school at Fort Leavenworth, where they planned Desert Storm, a lot of the planners came out of that school. But what's so reassuring, for me to hear is the first thing they read as a war planner is reading Mackinder. So that's very interesting, and it's a great takeaway. We got a few minutes left. Walter, you want to have a few times for some questions or statements, or
5 minutes? My questions.
5 minutes. So we've had a lot talked about today. Ray, when you mentioned something about the air base in Poland, is that Jasionka? Am I pronouncing it? Okay, so that's the new aerial, because that's right next to Rzeszów where the rail hub is.
Yes.
So that's okay. So got this dual hub. I think General Kimmitt's comments about duality and mobility is very important about this infrastructure. So.
Yeah. So, yeah, and he's absolutely right. And so that has become, and the Poles have invested a lot to improve that area for us. It used to be used, it still is used to deliver directly to the air base, U.S. C-17s and heavy cargo planes were coming in there almost twice a day into Jasionka. One thing I wanted to add that you were talking about with the base infrastructure, what the Poles have been doing in the last 5 years. We did an agreement with them in 2020, and part of the agreement to house U.S. forces was Poles would fund all the improvements of their bases to support us. And to date, they spent $3 billion worth of investments in improving base infrastructure just to host our rotational forces. There's no guarantee, and as we know right now, we've seen troops leaving Romania, how long American forces will be in Poland. But so Poland has stuck its neck out in the billions to support us. And the other thing I missed earlier, I wanted to mention, I forgot, was we should be thinking like out of the box on this funding issue. Yeah, we need to try to attract the private investors, commercial investments, return. But some of these bigger projects are hard to convince somebody, hey, via Carpathia, we need to, find company XYZ. Then those have been funded by government sources, EU and national budgets, basically national budget in Poland paying for its portion of via Carpathia, for example, or Rail Baltica. This is very difficult to fund. Rearm Europe is an $800 billion or euro investment in rearming Europe, basically, how to get defense industry back on its feet across Europe. So in my view, there should be some consideration at the EU under that program that some of these projects in the 3 Cs can be funded by Rearm Europe because of the military mobility, the dual infrastructure requirements of these big national projects that don't have big commercial interest. Some of the smaller, solar panel and these other kind of AI type digital things have more interest because they seem to have more return on investment potential. So we should be looking at out of the box other sources of money like Rearm Europe.
Great. And wouldn't you say, Kateryna, that making Lviv, extending the 3SI to Lviv, that's the capital of Western Ukraine. It's a very, very important part strategically of Ukraine, which we don't really talk about a lot. We always focus on Kiev. And go ahead.
Well, yes, I just smiled because you mentioned Odessa and Lviv, and we didn't really talk much about it. But to me, it's just self-evident that we need to think of Ukraine's survival as a whole, right? Obviously, these are important infrastructural hubs. I personally do not think that we need to include Lviv specifically. I think we need just to think broadly in Ukrainian terms and maintaining all of its infrastructure. Given the fact that Lviv is already significantly integrated with Polish infrastructure, I think we just need to keep up the good work in how it's already deeply integrated with Poland through the current existing connections.
Okay, all right. Well, on that note, go right ahead.
Candidly, I think Adrian is far better positioned to talk about this than any of us. But look, there's plenty of private capital to go around. There's more private capital sloshing around this world than you can shake a stick at. what is stopping the connection between that private capital and those programs? Corruption and guarantee of getting your money out if you need to get your money out. So the one thing that we have not talked about in all of this is the role where governments impede the programs. But look, there is no problem getting money. All the investors are asking for is a good, honest return on investment and a little bit of isolation from corruption. But I'll turn it over to you, Adrian.
Yeah,
Well-
and we need more bulldog ambassadors like Adrian. And that's a cue for Max to bark.
He's sleeping. He's smarter than I am. What I was going to say is I'm not sure I agree completely with the corruption. I think corruption is a big factor in a lot of the Eastern European countries. We're seeing the scandal in Ukraine going on. I think it's rampant in Romania, Bulgaria, a lot of the Eastern and former Russian-controlled countries. However, I see trying to mix two things which are not mixing well in terms of the 3 Cs initiative. If you're going to do private jobs and use private capital to get best returns, the projects have to be projects that actually have a return, that have a tangible return, like a profit, like a gas station gives you money. You invest, you buy it, you sell gas, you make money. A road like Via Carpathia or a railroad that adjoins Via Carpathia, there's unless you put tolls on it or other revenue generating method, is not going to generate specific dollars and cents for the investors, but will be a huge economic benefit for the region, for the countries it goes through, and for the regions generally, as will a lot of the other infrastructure projects. How do you monetize that? How do you get private money into that? I think these major construction projects are better funded. They're government type projects for which you do need a lot of countries to collaborate and invest their funds to do good things for their country and for the region. The smaller things, one of the earliest 3 Cs projects was a locomotive factory in Poland. I can see how that generates revenue. It was a great thing. It was a great project. It was easy. 3 Cs did it to kickstart their program and show people that it can be done. But to me, that's not really something that you need all these countries getting together to build a locomotive factory. If it's a good factory, private sector will get involved in that without the need for country involvement. I think you need public-private partnerships and you need other state investment tools to get these major projects funded and built. And I think that's what 3 Cs needs to figure out. How do you get the money? How do you justify it? Getting private investment into a road, especially a road that may not generate substantial toll traffic and revenues, may be problematic. Ergo, Via Carpathia has been on the drawing boards for 15, 20 years and nothing's really happened.
Adrian, I wish you were here so you and I could have an offsite on talking about this. The way that we've been able to basically turn projects in the Middle East, ranging from basically the when we brought in the new wireless systems inside of Iraq, to even making the scanning equipment around the Ring of Steel around Baghdad, how we turned that into a revenue generating opportunity for investors who are making huge amounts of money on it right now. And of course, here in Virginia, we have the Virginia Greenway. There are ways to do it. You're right. Some of the huge projects probably won't work, but the greatest disincentive that we've run into, having done this for the last 15 years, is The bigger they get, the more it attracts the flies and the fleas.
And on
Well-
that note, Adrian,
You,
thank you.
you may be right. Thank you, Glenn. It was great seeing you again. It was great meeting everybody, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. But I think 3C's great program, great ideas. We need to get some positive funding sources behind it.
Okay. On that note, we will end this panel and now shift to give Stephen Blank the final word. No, Walter gets the final. Thank you.
So I'm actually just going to say, I'm really thankful to this particular panel because
Speak to the mic.
yeah, I'm actually particularly grateful to this panel because the way the panel did it, it culminated what essentially was the effort. The effort is to see the economic and the security part of the 3Cs initiative as an important one. I was going to drop a bomb. If you had let people have a question, I was going to drop another bomb.
Sorry about that.
Which is, which is, what about the Danube? and that waterway may in fact be more important than anything else. But I said, oh, right, exactly right. Riverine warfare. We're learning it in Ukraine on the Dnipro. Anyway, but with that, I just want to say this was fabulous. And about the only thing that I can think is that Steve Blank will now be able to sort of round it all, put it all together for us. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Oh, yeah.
Good afternoon, our participants. Yes, we have another speaker. We have Dr. Stephen Blank. Everybody could read Dr. Stephen Blank's short biography in our brochure. Right. I would just like to add a few words about Dr. Blank. First time I saw Dr. Blank was probably, I don't know, about 15 years ago or over. He was at our conference and he described the Russian Empire essentially like a criminal enterprise, right, where they kicked the treasure up to the Tsarist family. And that was the most succinct and accurate description of the Tsarist Empire that I've ever heard. In addition to what's written about Dr. Blank in the biography, I would say he's probably he is one of the top security strategists in the United States. And as an illustration of this, in 2013, in September of 2013, we're having a closed meeting at the American Foreign Policy Council, and Dr. Blank was talking about what's going on in Crimea, and he predicted that Putin will attack Crimea. And that happened several months later. Okay. At that time, the assessment from the administration, the assessment from the CIA was that this was not going to happen. Okay. And he was one of the few voices that said it was going to happen. And in fact, he repeated this about 30 days before the invasion happened. So, with that said, this conference was actually an idea of Dr. Blank's. We had a closed session over at the AFPC, and we were assessing our conference in June. And during that closed session, the idea of having this conference on the 3Cs initiative came up. And that's when Walter committed to this, and we're all here. So enough from me, and I'll hand the microphone off to Dr. Stephen Blank. Thank you.
Thank you, Mykola. The check is in the mail for that. I want to thank Walter for inviting me. I also want to say that perhaps it should have been Janusz Bugajski rather than I speaking here because he wrote so much about the 3Cs initiative. And this speech, as well as the articles that I have written, which is going to be published by a Romanian journal who had asked for this, is dedicated to his memory. His knowledge of Poland was unrivaled, and his insight into Russia was probably unequaled as well. and I'm a poor substitute, but I'll do my best. Now, we've heard a lot today about this, the 3Cs initiative. I wrote my speech 3 weeks ago when I was at Georgetown University Hospital recovering from surgery. So the speech may not be up to date as far as everything you've heard in the last 3 hours, but I will try to incorporate things that you heard today and which I think are relevant to the question. And as I said to Walter, I took a page out of the Italian philosopher Benedetto Croce. Years ago, he wrote a book called What is Living and What is Dead in Hegel's Philosophy, which is always, you know, for somebody who studied Russia and Soviet Union, Hegel is important because that's where Marx got a lot of his ideas that then came down to Lenin et al. But the question is, what is living in, what is dead with regard to the 3Cs initiative is of importance. Because what we've heard today is that this is a good idea that is in severe trouble. As Kateryna said, 14 out of 143 projects are finished after 10 years. Now, a book published about the 3Cs in the initiative in 2022 said there were 81 projects. So we've had 62 projects added in 3 years that show no progress towards completion. That gives you a sense of what's wrong here. And I wanted to address some of these issues, speaking as someone who was trained as a historian of Russia and who has studied European diplomatic history all of my life, because I think those are the contexts in which you need to see both what is living and what is dead, or what is vital and what has failed with regard to the 3Cs concept. And if you look at it in a broader context, I think you get to see what really works, what is living, as well as what has failed. The idea of the 3Cs initiative, the integration along economic and political and now military lines of the whole expanse from the Baltic to the Black Sea, originates in World War I. Not in 1920 with Pilsudski, not in the 2000s with the Polish initiative, but rather originates with a German scholar named Friedrich Naumann, who writes a book in 1915 called Mitteleuropa, which was a blueprint for German domination of Europe after the war. It really was in line with German war aims as we knew them to be in 1917-18, in which we saw, for example, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and so on. If you're a Russian historian, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't worry about it. The point is that these plans, Naumann, Pilsudski, Count Peter Rosenstock-Huessy in Germany in the 20s, other plans, Jean Monnet, founder of the EU, all of them testify to the need to complete European integration and restore something along the lines of the Habsburg Empire and maybe the Hohenzollern Empire as well. It comes out of a sense that Europe is not only incomplete, but vulnerable. And it is vulnerable to both German imperialism and/or Russian imperialism, or both, as we saw in 1939. So the famous line of Hastings Ismay about NATO, that NATO keeps the Americans in, the Germans down, and the Russians out, still applies. And that's one of the reasons why the 3Cs initiative failed, as I'll explain to you. And we have to be honest, that up till now, it's basically a failure, despite some successes. And the failures were outlined in the preceding panel, far better than I could do. The reason for its failure is very simple. A few years ago, CEPA, think tank, the Center for European Political Analysis, which is devoted supposedly to Central European and East European security, held a conference on the 3Cs initiative here in town. State Department desk officer for the 3Cs initiative said that nobody comes to see him except the Polish ambassador or the members of the Polish embassy. Why? This is a Polish project which is seen by East European governments as the son of Międzymorze, which was intended to be a project for Polish leadership of Eastern and Central Europe to prevent either or both Russian and German imperialism from reviving after World War I, and therefore they don't trust it. Well, on that basis, we could see right there one of the reasons for the failure. Whereas Poland, as we've discussed, makes advances, the rest of Europe is skeptical. Second, if you're a historian, and we just talked about this again at the last panel, you have to remember how the Habsburg Empire was characterized in the 19th and early 20th century before its demise. Characterization of the Habsburg Empire, and this will not shock anybody who has noticed all the problems with the projects of the Three Seas Initiative, was characterized as despotism tempered by sloth. You could talk that way about the Three Seas Initiative, except that it's democracy or proto-democracy tempered by sloth, plus the fact of corruption. As one of my Ukrainian emigre friends said to me about Ukraine, but it applies to Eastern Europe as well, they've lived through corruption for 500 years. What makes you think they will stop now? And we're seeing this major scandal unfold in Ukraine right before our eyes. And don't think it's just Eastern Europe. I went to graduate school in Chicago in the old days. I was just telling Orest here, I was in grad school in 1972. Press conference, the old Mayor Daley, and somebody gets up to him and says, Mayor Daley, what do you have to say about the fact that there's corruption in South Vietnam? Daley looked at this guy like, what truck did you fall off of? And he said, there's corruption right here in Cook County. And by God, there was lots of it. So, okay. Moreover, mismanagement. I moved to Washington in 2013 after spending 24 years in Harrisburg working for the Army at the Army War College. So I was supposed to speak at a conference at the Kennan Institute, which thank God has been revived. So I'm taking the metro down to the Kennan Institute. Of course, the metro broke down. And since I was on the first panel, I'm going crazy. How do I, let people know I'm stuck? And this woman next to me said, sir, you have to understand. What are the problems with metro? First, we serve three governments, Virginia, DC, Maryland. Second, the original management of them gave out these huge pensions to everybody. And so therefore, they don't have enough money to do what they have to do now. And third, there's mismanagement. All right? I mean, so this is not a foreign problem. This should be clear to us that this is a problem inherent in the provision of public goods across state lines. As any economist or good political scientist will tell you. Therefore, what are the conditions for the success of the Three Seas Initiative? One, I can tell you right off, given what we just said, every European state has to see itself as a more or less equal beneficiary of this project, or projects, plural, in order to contribute fully and maximize chances for success. Now, anybody who knows Eastern Europe knows that's not going to happen on its own, which leads me to the second condition for success. The United States has to be extensively involved, and I mean materially as well as politically, in supporting this project because the security of Europe, as General Kimmitt has said, depends on the ability to build civilian and military infrastructure, logistics, not just east-west, but north-south. And the same holds true for defending these countries against Russian energy penetration. Margarita has talked about Bulgaria. You could say the same thing all across the Balkans. Russian energy penetration is the foundation of Russian influence across the Balkans. For example, Serbia's energy network is basically owned by Moscow. And as a result of this going back 20, 30 years, Moscow is able to fund this vast infrastructure of media and other networks that influence Serbian politics to an unhealthy degree. The same can be said in Bulgaria, as Margarita has said. The same was true in other countries, as Moscow tried to launch coups in these countries, and is still trying very hard in the Balkans to do so. So two conditions are, this has to be a pan-European project. Second, the United States has to be a moving spirit, if not the initiator, because if the United States initiates it, then maybe everybody in Europe will line up behind it and actually contribute to making it work. Third, there has to be a greater role for private enterprise here. I just spoke to you, and we heard from the earlier panel about the problems of public management. Public goods are a hard sell because it's very hard to make a profit. The New York Times tomorrow has an article coming out as to why it's so hard to renovate Penn Station. Now, as a native New Yorker, I understand this. And I understand, it's the same thing behind the Mamdani election. People are fed up because public goods are not being built fast enough to meet the demand both of the public and of the Times. And that's not a knock on New York only, it's true in a lot of places. But again, you need public-private partnerships, as somebody just said at the end here. You need private capital to get engaged. These are not necessarily profit-making projects, but they are of the utmost importance because they facilitate private profit-making projects, and they facilitate the security that keeps Russia out. Fourth, Ukraine, Turkey, and Balkan countries, Albania and Montenegro, as Margarita said, need to be included. We need to offer Ukraine a true vista of integration into Europe. The 3 Cs initiative may be described as a regional or sub-regional initiative within the context of European politics. You can choose. The point is that these kinds of projects, and there's this big literature on this in the political science field, if you're interested, but the point of this is that these projects facilitate integration within and with the EU and NATO. There is no excuse why Ukraine is excluded from this, as well as from the EU, and I've argued, as Glenn and others know, and Walter knows for years, that Ukraine needs to be in NATO now, because that would deter the Russians tomorrow. It would give the United States and NATO escalation dominance in the war, and would make it clear to Moscow that any more attacks on Ukraine might involve Article 5, which they clearly do not want to touch. So the point is that Ukraine needs to be in there, and there needs to be investment in restoring Ukrainian energy. All the people who spoke from Ukraine were sitting in darkness. Why? There's no power. And we know why there's no power. The Russians are bombing the hell out of the country. And you can't get power in there fast enough. Well, this is a way to do that. And what's more, to the extent that we're able to invest in Ukraine, and there are many ways to do so, even if you want to go through the defense industry, and give them the capital to do what they can. To the extent that there is investment in Ukraine, Ukraine can become a net energy exporter to the Balkans, if not to Central Europe, like Slovakia, Poland, and so on. I wrote an article 3 years ago on Balkan energy situations. We need to build pipelines and all these energy networks into the Balkans. We also need to address the fact that green energy is growing, whereas fossil fuel use, as was pointed out in the first panel, is ebbing. What, you say no? Well, okay, but the European Union is not going to stand for that kind of policy. And
I'm not going to stand for pro-fossil, but they should stand.
Well, they should. What they should do and what they will do, as you know, are very different. Okay. All right, maybe. The point is that to the extent that we can substitute other forms of energy that are cheaper than fossil in Balkan area and in Eastern and Central Europe, we again reduce the possibilities for Russia to interfere, and we help clean up the environment in these countries. Whether or not they should or not, we may have a dispute here. Nevertheless, it's worth thinking about it. Furthermore, we need to think creatively about getting energy, in this case fossil fuel, to the Balkans. You may have seen an article in Monday's New York Times that the Trump administration has now signed a deal with Greece to get LNG to Greece. Why? The refineries are in Greece. And from Greece, they can go all over the Balkans. But if you finished the infrastructure in the Balkans, like the Trans-Ionian pipeline, which goes from Greece through Albania to Croatia to the refinery on Kirk Island, which then can send gas and oil to Austria and Germany and Italy, you have again trumped the, no pun, trumped the Russian, this is a non-political statement, trumped the Russian energy program. Point I'm trying to make here is that there are opportunities already there. Furthermore, to the extent that you are able to work in the Middle East, and the Trump administration, the first Trump administration tried this by trying to set up a mechanism whereby the gas that Israel, Egypt, Cyprus, and now Lebanon have discovered off their coastline in the Mediterranean could be adjudicated, refined, and sent to European refineries above and beyond the needs of those countries themselves. And then from Greece, go up into Europe. That was a worthwhile initiative. Now, it may not be cost efficient because of the cost of building this pipeline, but it needs to be looked at in conjunction with this kind of decision by the Trump administration, because if fossil fuel demand grows in these countries, as it might, then you're going to have to find a source perhaps beyond the capability of the United States alone to support them. And the same is true about getting U.S. gas and oil to Poland and Lithuania and build terminals from Świnoujście and Klaipėda down into the Balkans, again, through 3C initiatives projects. The point I want to make, and we could go on and on about this, is that the opportunities are there. As General Kimmitt said, this is both an opportunity and a necessity. And it's a strategic opportunity that comes along really once in a generation. Because if we don't know what we're doing, and you can make the argument that we don't right now, Russia will be able to swindle a victory against the West from a point of view of strategic inferiority. And then all bets are off. And that's one of the reasons why we're here today, to argue against that. So, as I said, a fourth condition is Ukraine must be in there. Same goes for Turkey, for similar reasons. We already mentioned that Turkey is one of the prime strategic guarantors of the Black Sea, which is essential to any kind of reconstruction of South and Southeastern Europe. Turkey is a member of NATO. It's a difficult member, admittedly, but the Biden administration was able to work with Turkey. The Trump administration looks like it's able to work with Turkey, and Turkey is still importing vast amounts of Russian gas and sending it to the and oil and sending it to the Balkans. We have to find a way to reduce that. I don't think you can eliminate it, but you might be able to reduce it. And what's more, you need to find a way to make sure that in any post-war settlement of the Ukraine war, that Turkey not only stands up to the Montreux Treaty, but that it helps guarantee the freedom of commercial navigation in the Black Sea, and that Russia's legitimate interest in commercial navigation in the Black Sea does not overwhelm that of other countries there, like Ukraine, to a lesser degree even Georgia, or certainly Turkey or Bulgaria or Romania. That can only be done if Turkey has a stake in the outcome. And investing European resources, or Western resources, more broadly speaking, in Turkey is essential. I think the greatest strategic mistake the European Union ever made was suspending its discussions with Turkey, its negotiations 22 years ago about Turkish membership. That gave Erdogan little alternative but to try to carry out the foreign policy, which he has done so far with great success. But it is not a policy that promotes European integration. It is a policy that relitigates conflicts with Greece and Cyprus. Furthermore, we talk about reading Mackinder. Mackinder is, every time you read a long article about the Caucasus and Central Asia, General Kimmitt may know this, Glenn certainly knows it, I know it, others may as well. You get Mackinder into the Central Asian and Caucasus discussion. The Trump pipeline, Trump Regional International Road for International Peace and Prosperity in the Caucasus should be thought of as being the basis for a unification with Europe. Why? It opens up the possibilities of bringing Azeri gas and oil directly to Europe, and it opens up the possibilities for bringing Central Asian gas and oil, rare earths, and everything else to Europe, and vice versa. For example, in Central Asia, there's a vital need for environmental support to save the water supply. Anybody who studies Central Asia knows this right off the top. How do you get that stuff to them? Well, if you have a direct road, which is going all the way to the Caspian, and then you can put everything on barges and then build roads, take it on roads from the Caspian to the Central Asian countries that need it the most, you save a lot of money than rather having to airlift everything in there because they're landlocked countries and you can't get in there by sea. So here again, you have to think big, but nevertheless, thinking big makes strategic and ultimately commercial sense. There needs to be somebody or some dedicated office thinking big, not only about Central Asia and the Caucasus, but about how you unite them with Europe and how you unite them with the Three Seas initiatives. Yes, but
they're built in roads. We would be shooting behind the target in that case.
well, but there are other targets. Okay, I take your point, General, but there are other targets. The Chinese are not interested in sending them the environmental equipment, for example, just to give you an example. And second, these states want American investment. They just said so last week when they were in the White House. So let's give it to them and let's find a way to make it happen. And let's find a way to make the European Union, which is now much more interested in Caucasus and Central Asia for gas and oil and other reasons, able to do so as well. The point is, we need to think strategically instead of myopically. The Three Seas Initiative opens the way to that. But if we fulfill the conditions that I've outlined here, and they're not conditions that other people haven't noticed or discussed, then we have a chance not only to realize the opportunity that General Kimmitt talked about, but to recognize and surmount necessity of defending Europe against the many threats, not just the Russian, the many threats that we now see imperiling Europe. And since I talked about Croce's idea about what is good, alive and dead in Hegel's philosophy, let me finish with the idea that Hegel and then Marx took. In this case, freedom is the recognition of necessity. Thank you. You have time for questions? Is there time for questions?
Yeah, one, I think.
I know I'm the only thing standing between you and the food, but
Yeah.
okay.
You're right.
Okay, so is there a question? Yes, sir.
Thanks, Julian Romanian, fellow at AGI Institute. Thanks so much for this very thought-provocative intervention. And to your conditions that you mentioned, specifically the second condition that you mentioned, the US has to be involved as sort of a organizing force, convening force. Do you think this can actually, how feasible is that, specifically with this administration that openly says that, Ukraine and Europe is actually not in the US security interest? They say it openly in public.
I take your point, but to quote a Habsburg thinker, if you will it, it will happen. In other words, it's not a dream. I'm quoting Theodore Herzl. He's talking about the idea of a Zionist state, and everybody thought he was crazy. It's necessary to think about this and do it because, for one, American policy is not carved in stone. And this administration's policies on Europe go back and forth, especially Ukraine, as you well know, go back and forth. Yes, we have big obstacles. Two, we have to, but on the other hand, we have to fight to get this vision implemented. The first Trump administration, to some degree, as was mentioned here, actually embraced this idea. Not enough, but nevertheless, we have to make the case because nobody else is going to make the case. And not even the Europeans. And what's more, to be brutally frank with you, there is no such thing as European security. There is transatlantic security. Because if the United States leaves Europe, what will happen, and General Kimmitt knows this probably better than anybody in the room, is the renationalization of European security agendas. Germany will go its way, and that way often means a deal with Russia. France and Britain will go their way. Italy will certainly go its way. The Balkan states will not unite. The East European states, Central and East European states, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and Poland, and the Baltic states will fragment. There is the only way European security as a whole makes any sense is if it's transatlantic security. I believe this in every fiber of my being, and having studied all this for decades. Whether or not Donald Trump believes it now, it is up to us to argue for that, whether or not we're successful, because the work must go on regardless of whether or not we are successful now. The next administration, the next Congress may come to a different point of view. And what's more, if Vladimir Putin continues to behave the way he has behaved all year, he may help them realize that I'm right and they're wrong.
What a way to end.
I just, there's no way to thank everybody. No, you don't have to sit down. Actually, I know that everybody's, and I'm glad that the food finally arrived, so on and so forth. But I just simply wanted to say, I've done 150 of these, and each time I keep saying that it's the best I've ever seen. But today, I must say, and I'm glad that it was shorter rather than the 9-hour marathons we've often done, that this 4-hour compact, this wonderful meeting of the minds, and this truly was even the context. I knew the Bush School, it impressed me, man, that the venue itself lends itself for this, and it's an academic setting. And even though these are, we had ambassadors, generals, top-level academics, and so on and so forth, all getting together, and they came here, and this was perhaps the most enriching intellectual 4 hours I've ever been a party of. So I thank you folks for sitting through all this, and I think you enjoyed it from the very beginning to the very end. And I thank you. The food's there. Enjoy yourself. Thank you.